Hi, this is Story Time with Grandpa Nick. So the question we're going to deal with today is, why was the Nile so important to the ancient Egyptians? Now, the first thing we need to look at is the geography. Now, what does geography actually mean? It means the land, the resources, and the people, and how they all interact together. Now, the Nile is an incredibly long river, which is navigable. That means you can take a boat up or down it from its mouth, which flows into the Mediterranean Sea, all the way to a cataract. That's rapids, which is there are stones sticking out of the water. The water's flowing very fast. There are little waterfalls. This means that you can't really go above that without a lot of trouble. Now, there's a desert on both banks of the Nile throughout its course up to Aswan. This means it's very difficult for an invading army to attack from either the east or west. And of course, to the north, we've got a sea, the Mediterranean, and to the south, it's already very hot, very humid, and there's no civilization to the south. Now, the next point is ecology. Now, ecology is how does weather interact with the land? Now, because there are two rivers which are much further up the Nile, probably 800 miles up the Nile, which feed into the Nile, they get the full force of what's called the spring monsoon, which happens in tropical areas and semi-tropical areas. And when you're 800 miles up the Nile, it is semi-tropical. So, now these usually happen in April and May. And you get lots of rain every day for 2 months. Now, what do I mean by a lot of rain? Right, imagine a really bad storm here anywhere in Britain. And now a really bad storm here lasts an hour, 2 hours, not more than that. But the monsoons last almost non-stop for 2 months, non-stop, day and night. This means that downstream there's a big flood. Now, the flood carries a lot of soil with it, which is packed with nutrients. What are nutrients? Nutrients are chemicals that help crops grow fast and well, and it makes the land it finishes up on very good for growing them. As you get a flood every year at roughly the same time, you can plan when to plant your crops, and you know when they'll be ready to harvest. Some years, if the monsoon was early, you might get 2 floods, and as a result, 2 crops. This means that you know when your population is free to do other things. You can use a lot of them to build things, for example. Now, the first building they would come up with is somewhere to store the grain, which is the harvest, from the crops. It needed to be a dry space and proof against animals that would eat the grain which you needed. It was called a granary. You also needed a mill to grind the corn into flour in order to cook it, to turn it into bread. Many years, because of the fertility of the Nile Valley, courtesy of the nutrient-rich floods, the population was free to do other things. One of the first things they did was develop irrigation systems, which involved lifting water uphill to increase the amount of land which was growing food. This surplus meant that their leader, known as the pharaoh, could get the people to build in palaces and many other impressive buildings. The most famous of these buildings are the pyramids at Giza, a flat space outside the city of Cairo, which is 400 feet above the Nile. So think about it, you've got to get the water up from ground level to 400 feet. That's quite a tall hill. The pyramids were built to house the bodies of dead pharaohs, and they're huge. Think about the shopping centre which you sometimes go to and the car parks around them. While the largest of the pyramids would cover all the space that the car parks and the shops take up. They're the most impressive man-made structures I've ever seen, and I'm lucky enough to have travelled the world and seen most of the famous natural and man-made wonders of the world. Nothing beats the pyramids of Giza. So that's what the ancient Egyptians did with the time they had, because the Nile ensured they would not be hungry and they had times to spare to do other things. They mastered a considerable number of other technologies in addition to agriculture and irrigation. Notably, writing. In their case, it was pictures that were called hieroglyphic. They also mastered aspects of mathematics, for example, mechanics, which is a system for devising machines to help man do functions that need repeating, like lifting water uphill. So they developed water wheels. Thousands of workers were building the pyramids on this plateau of Giza. So they needed an awful lot of water every day. Some of them were freemen doing their duty, some were slaves. So there needed to be soldiers to stop the slaves running away. So not everybody was actually building, there were people guarding the people doing the building. They also needed engineering. What is this? It's a science to do with making machines and designing and making tools, and also making buildings. All these skills were needed to help build the huge structures they were making. There's also another arm of maths, arithmetic. This helped the supervisors to work out how much bread, vegetables, dairy products, salt, fish, and possibly meat was needed every day to feed the slaves, free workers, soldiers, and supervisors. This means they'd also mastered the skill of making pottery to store all these different foodstuffs and preserve and move them. Back to writing. For all of the above to work efficiently, you need lists. How much grain is stored in the granaries? Is there enough to feed everybody until the next harvest comes in? How much flour needs to be moved to geysers to bake the bread to feed all the people today, and also next week and next month? You also need a list to send up the Nile to the quarry to tell them how many stones you need next month, and each one of these stones weighed 2,500 kilograms. That's very heavy. And a list for the stonemasons telling them what stones to cut so you can install the central burial chamber and the secret tunnel leading to it. You see, the pyramids were made without cement, so each stone had to fit next to the last one. The final and probably most important list is the one to make sure that the stones go onto the earth ramp, which goes up the side of the pyramid with rollers, going up the side of the partially built pyramid in the right order. How on earth did they manage to haul these heavy blocks of stone up the ramps of earth on their rollers? Well, back to mechanics. Yes, there was a gang of slaves at the front pulling the rock, but using pulleys as well, there were probably 2 gangs of slaves further down the ramp pulling the block up from behind. Probably the most dangerous job in the crew moving the stones were the men and women who had to bang chocks, that's wooden blocks, into the earth to stop the block of stone rolling backwards off the ramp. They must have woven long ropes, which will have on occasion snapped, killing slaves by the dozen, if not hundreds. Finally, what did young slaves do? Well, carry water, salt and food up the ramp. Grease the pulleys with oil, probably olive oil. And lots more jobs around the barracks, housing the slaves and the soldiers guarding the slaves. Finally, one thing it's worth drawing attention to is that writing didn't develop beside the Nile to glorify the pharaoh.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode, so please subscribe to the channel.